Every now and then I like to grab a few watches that have some similar looking features, take some macro shots and produce a finishing comparison video because I've found that that is the best time to truly appreciate a watch's, well, good or bad finishing. And in today's video I'm going to be comparing an Addiesdive, the Forteller engineered diver and a San Martin, and they're going to be sort of up against a control watch which is a £3,000 Seiko limited edition MM300, which has been finished by the Zaratsu finishing experts at Seiko and Grand Seiko, so it should in theory be head and shoulders above the rest. Now I'm going to kick things off by looking at the all-important transition on the cases between the polished surfaces and the brushed surfaces. This is quite often where watches and brands come unstuck. I think when finishing a watch case, this is one of the most difficult things to do really well. Now the Addiesdive, I've got to say, shocked me. I knew the finishing was good on this watch, but I didn't realise how good that transitional line was. It's really good. I was not expecting that. It's good on the Forteller Engineer. It's really good on the San Martin. We know that San Martin are capable of finishing watches like this. This wasn't a surprise to me. The Addiesdive, though, really was a surprise. Now, the Seiko has a bit more of a corner, so it's a little bit more difficult to see that transition clearly. It's also easier to achieve a good transition when the corner is a little bit more steep, like it is on the Seiko. But for me, the Addiesdive comes out on top here because it is, by quite some considerable distance, the cheapest watch. Next, I took some shots of the brushing on the sides of the cases. The Addiesdive, a beautiful satin brushing on the side of that case, similar to the San Martin look. The Forteller Engineer has some really quite coarse brushing, and the Seiko sits sort of somewhere in between, doesn't it? Now in these pictures I'm trying to capture the smoothness and the quality of the polishing on the case. I'm looking at the clarity and crispness of the reflection in that polished surface, and the Forteller, for me, out of the three more affordable watches, the Forteller seems to be beautifully polished. That reflection looks super crisp. It's good on the Addiesdive. It's fractionally better perhaps on the San Martin. Now the Seiko, that has been finished with Zaratsu polishing, and so you would expect the finishing on the polished surfaces on that watch to be the best, and it is. Having said that, the Forteller isn't a million miles away from the Seiko, is it? It's a slightly different story when we look at the polished surface on the clasp. I think the Forteller Engineer hasn't been finished, or the clasp on that watch hasn't quite been finished to the same level as the case, which isn't a surprise. The Addiesdive, the Forteller and the San Martin all look quite similar. They all look to have been finished in an identical way, with that surface being brushed to give it that chamfer and then polished to remove the sort of brushing and the coarse finish. And it doesn't look like on any of those surfaces, on those three watches anyway, like the polishing has been done enough to get rid of the previous brushing marks. But it is a different story on the Seiko. As you would expect, we are looking at a £3,000 Seiko. That's almost $4,000. It looks like the clasp outer shell has also been put through the Zaratsu polishing process, and yeah, that surface is impressive. I thought I'd take a closer look at the bezels. They are all slightly different, so it's not really a fair comparison, but again, the Addiesdive, look at the quality of the brushing and the polishing and the transitions on that Addiesdive. That is incredible. The polished surface on the case of the Forteller, well, we know that those surfaces have been done very nicely, and again we're seeing that with this picture. The San Martin looks nice. There's nothing there really that's sort of jumping out to me as being out of the ordinary, but the Seiko actually is a little bit disappointing. That polished surface on the corner of the bezel looks a little bit rough, doesn't it? The reflection is a bit sort of distorted, so I don't think that's gone through the Zaratsu polishing process. Now again, these pictures aren't really a fair comparison because the bezels are quite different, but I will say the Forteller Engineer looks incredible. The bezel on that watch has been done to an incredible level, and I'm talking about the engraving, the crispness of the numbers and the markers on that ceramic bezel insert. The Addiesdive has also been done nicely, but it's a different bezel insert, isn't it? It's a brushed steel insert, so not really a fair comparison. The San Martin has what looks like an aluminium insert, so it's been painted and it looks to be nice enough. The Seiko, nothing special there, it's just nicely done. The hands, again, we're not really comparing like for like, but you can really see the quality of the Seiko with the hands. I mean, they are incredibly crisp. The corners are so sharp. There's some brushing and polishing on that hour hands. It's, yeah, incredible. This San Martin has a sort of distressed look, so perhaps not the best watch to use in this sort of comparison. A bit like the Forteller, really, because that has a painted or powder coated finish. But the Addiesdive hands, dual facet polished hands, really nice, crisp. Yeah, I wasn't really seeing any imperfections on those hands. Not what I was expecting from this watch, I have to say. I then took a close look at the print on the dials. Again, they all seem to have been done slightly differently. They're all really nice and crisp. Some look really quite deep and almost elevated from the dial. Others look quite flat. The print on the Seiko does look to be better than it is on the other watches, but really there's not a lot to pick between them, is there? I always like to look at the markers at the 12 o'clock, and again, I'm sort of comparing apples and pears, really. The Addiesdive is quite nice, although it looks a little bit sort of soft and rounded. The corners on that double 12 o'clock marker, not particularly crisp, but then they're not particularly crisp on the Seiko either. The San Martin watch, again, is a sort of distressed vintage looking watch, so those markers aren't supposed to be super crisp and elevated. They are loom printed onto the dial, but it looks nice enough. And the Forteller Engineer has a very interesting sort of layered dial. The print looks really good. The shapes look really crisp. The corners on the sort of black elements look really nice. Yeah, not a particularly useful comparison, but it's always nice to zoom in on this part of the dial. And here I've just taken a second shot of the same 12 o'clock markers from a different angle to try and catch the light. And again, I don't think we're seeing anything new really. Just nice to see these markers at a different angle with the light play slightly different. So I think what I'm taking from this particular comparison is that the Addiesdive is sort of the winner. It's by some distance the cheapest watch. I was not expecting the steel finishing on this particular watch to be this good. Yes, I think the Seiko is the best finished watch out of the four watches, but given its price, of course, you'd expect that. And in places, the other three watches do look like more affordable watches when compared to the Seiko, which we would expect, but the other three watches still have elements on them that are incredible for the money. The quality that we're seeing on affordable watches when it comes to the polishing, the brushing, and the change between the two is incredible these days. It really is. And I think it's the reason why these watches are just so popular. Right, guys? Let me know if you found that useful. I will continue to produce these videos because I think over time they do give us a good indication as to which brands and which watches are well finished and which ones perhaps aren't. Let me know what you think. Right, guys, thanks for watching.